Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Board Explorer, and I'm continuing my Sussex border walk. And I'm continuing fairly close to where I left off last time in Littlehampton, in West Sussex, and I'm down by the harbour here. Now, I linked in the previous episode where I was up at where the Arran Tower Mill was to a walk I did a couple of years ago, which was along the harbour here. And so I sort of recommend you having a look at that if you want to see the extent from the top down to where the lifeboat is, because that's the walk that I did then. I've come back and I've picked, as you can see, a very misty and murky day. But I'm not daunted by that because it certainly gives a certain amount of atmosphere, I think, here in Littlehampton, and will perhaps give the atmosphere of what it must have been like on a winter's day here back in the 18th century. I'm just on my way to Climping, which is on the other side of the river. I've got to get over to the other side of the river, but in order to do that I've got to get down to the footbridge. Passenger, don't know what I'm talking about half the time. So I've come back down here to the slipway, which is where I ended my stroll in the other video that I've linked to. And this is a very lovely place. It's I think we must have got a low tide because there's a bit of exposed sand and what have you. The river looks pretty low. So this is the River Arran, where it meets in the estuary here onto the English Channel. And back in the 11th century, this was a very tiny port, really small port. Littlehampton was mainly about fishing and farming, and perhaps a few bits and bobs would come in. It was very much overshadowed by Arundel, which is about 5 or so miles upriver. And so boats would have come in here, but not really stopped and done very much. It wasn't really until the 17th and 18th century that the port began to grow. And in fact, if you look at the census for 1801, it says that there was just under 600 people living and working in Littlehampton. So I'm going to take a stroll down past the old wharfs and that sort of thing to the footbridge, and as I do, I pass here in front of me the lifeboat station from the RNLI. Now, there was a lifeboat station, I think back in the 1840s, I think it was, and if I've got that wrong it'll bung it on the screen, which was up at Harbour Park, very close to where the Arran Tower Mill was when I was last there. It moved about a little bit, and then eventually in 1967, thanks to Blue Peter, the children's television programme, a massive appeal went out for a lifeboat station down here by the slipway. And they were overwhelmed apparently with paperbacks. It was through having paperback books that I don't know how they managed to do this, but they secured enough money in 1967 for the first of the Blue Peter lifeboats to be put in here, and it was very successful, and they've supported it, I think, up until comparatively recently, helping to raise funds and make awareness to improve and update the boats, which is fantastic. Just been coming through a very interesting area where it's just set back from the river, and you really get the sense that those houses, the big proud houses, must have been where the wealthy merchants lived. And so that in the 1800s, when they were built, the Georgian period, they could keep a good eye on all the stuff that was coming in and going out. Absolutely amazing and impressive houses the money that these people must have made must have been incredible. I'm just taking a stroll away from the river now, up I think this is called Terminus Place, past these rather beautiful old cottages, probably some of the wharf workers, no doubt, and ship hands and harbour workers, that sort of thing. Can't get my words out today. It's incredibly cold and I can feel my mouth gumming up. I'm coming up towards the station because the station is an important part of our story. The station and the railway came around in the 1860s. So much happened around in the 1860s that this part of Littlehampton must have been at that point one massive great building site as improvements were going on. So I have the station in front of me, but to my right is the block of flats here. This was the Terminus Hotel, and this road here is Terminus Road, where the railway terminates. This was a Terminus Hotel that was built in 1866 and was actually here until 1970, and I think beyond at one point was the Regency Cinema. Well, it's down here I want to take you because there's still one tiny little relic of the station, of the hotel, that has remained. Let's have a look at it. And this is it. This unassuming little weird facade right at the back of the Osler's flats here off Terminus Road is the Osler Station. Now, an ostler was in the old days somebody who would look after the horses of those people in horses and carriages, dog carts, that sort of thing. And back in the mid 1800s they were still being used, and you still needed, when you arrived at a hotel, someone to look after your horses from your carriage, or your horse and cart, or a carrier's cart, or whatever. And this is where the ostler would have been. It's the last little bit to show that there was anything here connected with the hotel. So it's nice to see it, even if now I believe it's used for looking after the bins inside. But not much to see now, I'm afraid. Back down to the river now, just to have a look, and the mist has actually cleared a bit, although the sun is quite powerful and shining in my face. And we see on the other side, just opposite me here, looking down on the river, the more modern houses that are now, and flats and apartments that are lining the river, which give a good view and is very pleasant. But of course all of this would have been heavy industry back in its day, dealing with the port. Heading back to the road called River Road, whilst there is mostly modern houses here where whatever would have been here in the past, we get to see some of the old 1800s and later properties just sort of dotted about, but mostly it's built up. However, coming up to a gem. So despite these very modern houses, we get this, I think this is the last remaining intact warehouse, an example of 19th century warehouses here. It's now called Riverside Autos, and it has a car repairing place inside. But just look at this incredible building. It's absolutely beautiful. And if I carry on along, you'll see that they've kept some of the facades, but they've built the flats just behind them. At least they've kept the facade so that we do get the sense of what this section of the river and the wharf side must have looked like. Well, I've now arrived at the bridge, which is just behind me here, and almost as two sentinels on the east side of the bridge are two pubs, and you can imagine that these pubs, very much in the 1800s when they were built around 1860s, that they were the place where everybody went for a drink, all the workers on the quayside. So you've got one here called the Steam Packet, which is a lovely ornate, very, very Victorian sort of pub, and it is believed that it's named after the Steam Packet, which was a steamboat that used to run between Littlehampton here and now I know I'm going to get my French pronunciation wrong. Herfleurs or Honfleurs, is it, in Normandy, and it ran for about 20 years, from about 1863 to 1884, something like that. And I think that's where the name of the pub gets its name. On the opposite it is the Arran View, built at a similar sort of time, and both of these pubs have not really changed. Arran View, clearly, because it's looking over the river, so that's not hard to decipher. So behind me here is the railway, and it terminates just up there where we saw earlier. So I've not really gone terribly far. We've got the two pubs in front of me. And so this area was all sort of developed at very much the same time, as I hinted at before. And this, I think, is called Railway Wharf. I'm not sure. It's now Wharf Road. And we've got the river just there. Before we get to that, I'm just nipping up to the Customs House, or the old Customs House, because that's got a little interesting history of its own. It's not so impressive as it once was now, unfortunately. I don't suppose, but this is the old Customs House behind me. Now, in the 19th century, the merchants bringing in their goods here in Littlehampton had to go all the way up to Arundel if they wanted to declare to the customs what they were bringing in. And I think it wasn't until 1864 that they built an actual customs house here in Littlehampton. The effort of having to go by horse and cart up to Arundel just to say, oh, I've brought in this and this. Right, finally it's time for me to cross the river, and I'm going to cross the footbridge here. Now, there was a swing bridge here for a while. Originally the plan for the swing bridge came in about 1820, but the merchants up at Arundel rejected the idea. So instead, a chain ferry pretty much just below the front of the bridge here was operated, and that would take horses and people across the river. Well, that carried on until about 1908, and then, thanks pretty much to the campaigning of the vicar in Climping, which is sort of over the river and a mile or so that way, the swing bridge came about, and it was a massive, colossal affair to actually swing open and allow ships to pass. So you could cross the river on a bridge, but it would swing to allow bigger ships past. That lasted, I believe, until 1980, and I actually remember it in the 80s. And then they've got this bridge, which I think is a a sliding bridge now, so it will slide and allow anything to go through, although barely anything ever does. I'm pleased to say that the mist has all but gone, thank goodness. But if I come over here, look, you'll see here, just behind me, the remnants of the old gas lamps that used to work here, or used to glow, with the gas being operated for the swing bridge until I think the 1930s, when electricity came to town. The sign there says, "Welcome to Rope Walk." Thank you very much. Historic Rope Walk. There's a sign here also that tells you a little bit about it. And Rope Walk, of course, is where they would have made ropes. And ropes were very important for ships, of course. Apparently the average length of just one length of rope for a ship was 1,000 feet. And I read that HMS Victory in its day required 31 miles of rope. So that gives you an idea of how important and how much rope was actually used back in the day. So here, in very long buildings, down on this road to my left, rope was manufactured from hemp. And I also read, I don't know about here, but sometimes the rope makers would ride bicycles in order to get from one end of the rope to the other. Fascinating. Rope, of course, being made from hemp, a very dry substance, was very powdery, and in these long buildings it could build up, so it became a bit like the flour mills, potential explosive areas, so they had to be incredibly careful, and sometimes they did catch fire, which is a bit of a worry. But anyway, I'm now on my way to Climping, but that's where I leave it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe. Become a patron, support what I do if you can, and I will continue to make these videos. Give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.